I'll never forget the moment I found that friendship bracelet on my boyfriend's wrist. One of those colorful woven ones you see at Claire's, the kind teenage girls make for each other. My heart skipped a beat when I saw it peeking out from under his shirt cuff as he reached for his coffee that morning. And then there was the lip gloss in his jacket pocket. Bubblegum pink. The kind from Justice that smells like artificial strawberries. When I asked him about it, trying to keep my voice light and casual, he snarled at me like I'd accused him of murder. "It's for my niece," he said, his eyes flashing with something I'd never seen before. "Mind your business, Sarah. That was 4 days ago, and this morning he can't stop crying, begging me to tell him why I did what I did, why I destroyed everything we had built together over the past 3 years. When I first met Daniel at that coffee shop in downtown Portland 3 years ago, he seemed like everything I'd been looking for. He was charming in that understated way, with his sandy brown hair always slightly messy and those green eyes that crinkled when he smiled. He worked as a software engineer at a tech startup, drove a modest Honda Civic, and lived in a one-bedroom apartment in the Pearl District. I never told him that my father owned half the commercial real estate in the city, that I could have bought his entire apartment building with my trust fund. It wasn't about deception, it was about protection. My dad, Richard, had raised me after Mom passed when I was 12, and if there's one thing he drilled into me, it's that you never know who's after your money until it's too late. Our relationship felt different from anything I'd experienced before. Daniel insisted on transparency from day one. We shared our phone passwords, our email accounts, even our social media logins. It wasn't controlling, or at least it didn't feel that way at the time. It felt like trust, like we had nothing to hide from each other. He was old-fashioned in the sweetest way, always opening doors for me, pulling out my chair at restaurants, insisting on paying for every meal even though I made decent money as a graphic designer. He said he wanted me to exist in my femininity, to never worry about mundane things like bills or repairs. When I cooked for him, even when I burned the chicken or oversalted the pasta, he'd clean his plate and ask for seconds, telling me I was the best cook he'd ever met. Looking back now, I can see the red flags I missed. But love has a way of painting everything in rose-colored hues. The first real warning sign came about 6 months ago when he turned off his Find My iPhone location. We'd always shared our locations, not because we didn't trust each other, but because it made meeting up easier, especially when one of us was running late or stuck in Portland's notorious traffic. When I noticed it was off, I didn't think much of it at first. Technology glitches happen. But after 2 days, I brought it up casually over dinner at our favorite Thai place on Hawthorne. His reaction was explosive, completely out of character for the gentleman I thought I knew. "So now a man can't even have any privacy?" he shouted, loud enough that other diners turned to stare. "I do everything for you, Sarah. Everything. And this is how you repay me? By tracking my every move like some kind of stalker?" I was so shocked that I burst into tears right there in the restaurant, my pad thai growing cold as I sobbed into my napkin. That's when he switched gears, pulling me into his arms, stroking my hair. "I'm sorry, baby," he whispered, his voice suddenly soft again. "It's just been such a tough day at work. The new project manager is riding me hard, and I just wanted some independence, you know? To not feel like Big Brother is always watching." His explanation should have comforted me, but something felt off. The words came too fast, too rehearsed, like he'd been preparing them in case I asked. And the second I stopped crying, the moment my breathing returned to normal, he went right back to scrolling through his phone as if nothing had happened, as if he hadn't just screamed at me in public for the first time in our relationship. The next morning, after Daniel left for work, I sat at our kitchen table staring at my phone, my father's number pulled up on the screen. I'd always been independent, priding myself on handling my own problems, but something about Daniel's reaction had shaken me. Dad answered on the second ring, his voice warm and familiar. "Honey, what's wrong?" he asked, immediately picking up on my distress. I told him everything, about the location services, about Daniel's outburst, about the strange feeling in my gut that something wasn't right. Dad listened without interrupting, which was unusual for him. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment before speaking. "Sarah, I trust your instincts. You've always had a good head on your shoulders, but from everything you've told me about Daniel, he seems like a good guy. Maybe he's just stressed about work like he said. We all have bad days. I wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that I was overreacting, but that nagging feeling wouldn't go away. That same day, Daniel didn't come home. I texted him around 7, asking if he wanted me to save him dinner. No response. By 10, I was starting to worry. By midnight, I was pacing the apartment, alternating between anger and fear. Had something happened to him? Was he hurt, or was he just ignoring me? At 1 in the morning, my phone finally buzzed. Sorry, babe. Last-minute work trip to Seattle. Be back tomorrow. Love you? I stared at the text, reading it over and over. A work trip? At 1 in the morning? Without telling me? Without packing a bag? I knew every project he was working on, knew his schedule better than he did sometimes. There was no trip to Seattle planned. But what could I do? Call him a liar? Demand proof? That would only lead to another fight, another round of him making me feel like I was crazy for caring about him. So I did something I'm not proud of. I pretended to believe him. I texted back, "Oh, wow, that's so sudden. Drive safe, honey. Miss you already." And then I waited. He came home the next morning around 8, slipping into bed beside me with his clothes still on, reeking of perfume that definitely wasn't mine. It was floral and sweet, nothing like the vanilla body spray I'd worn for years. He was asleep within minutes, snoring softly, completely exhausted from whatever he'd really been doing all night. I lay there rigid beside him, my mind racing. The urge to shake him awake, to demand answers was almost overwhelming. But I forced myself to stay still, to think rationally. If I confronted him now, he'd just lie again, maybe even get angry. I needed to be smarter than that. As soon as his breathing deepened into real sleep, I carefully sat up, moving slowly so as not to wake him. That's when I saw it. The friendship bracelet on his wrist, pink and purple threads woven together with little plastic beads that spelled out BFF. My stomach lurched. Daniel didn't have any nieces that I knew of. He'd mentioned a nephew once, his sister's kid who lived in California, but never a niece. I leaned closer, and that's when I spotted the lip gloss sticking out of his jacket pocket. Justice brand, the kind marketed to tweens, in a shade called Cotton Candy Dreams. My mind raced through possibilities, each more disturbing than the last. Was he having an affair with someone who had a daughter? Was he buying gifts for a coworker's kid? But why lie about it? Why the secrecy? I slipped out of bed and padded to the kitchen, my hands shaking as I made coffee. I needed to think, needed to plan. Confronting him directly hadn't worked. He'd just lie. Maybe even turn it around on me somehow. No, I needed to be strategic about this. That evening, I pulled out all the stops. I made his favorite meal, beef Wellington with roasted vegetables and garlic mashed potatoes. It had taken me months to perfect the recipe, and I knew he couldn't resist it. I paired it with a glass of Jameson, neat, just the way he liked it. But tonight, I made it a double, and then another. By the time we were halfway through dinner, his eyes had that glassy, unfocused look that meant his guard was down. I kept my voice casual, conversational, as I refilled his glass one more time. "So, honey, how was Seattle? Did you get to see anyone while you were there?" I watched his face carefully, saw the brief moment of confusion before he remembered his lie. His forehead creased as he struggled to form a response. Yeah, I guess I saw a girl, my niece," he stammered, then seemed to catch himself. "That's why you ask?" My heart was pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it, but I kept my expression neutral, even managed a small smile. "Oh, I didn't know you had a niece in Seattle. That's nice. How old is she?" He took another sip of whiskey, buying time. "She's, 11. Amanda, my cousin's kid. She was visiting for some kind of school thing." The lies came easier now, flowing like water. He told me about Amanda's science fair project, about how she'd won second place for her volcano experiment. He even described taking her to Pike Place Market, buying her flowers from one of the vendors. The details were impressive, almost believable, except for one thing. I knew his family. I'd spent 2 Christmases with them, knew every cousin, every aunt and uncle. There was no Amanda. I smiled and nodded, playing along, even as my stomach churned. "Oh, that's so sweet of you to spend time with her. Is that where the friendship bracelet came from?" I gestured to his wrist, keeping my tone light and curious. His hand immediately went to cover it, a reflexive, defensive gesture. "Yeah, she made it for me. You know, kids." The next few days were torture. I went through the motions of our normal routine, kissing him goodbye in the morning, texting him during the day, cooking dinner, watching Netflix on the couch. But I was constantly watching, constantly analyzing every word, every gesture. He'd gotten better at covering his tracks, deleting his texts more frequently, being vague about his schedule, but he couldn't hide everything. One evening, about a week after the Seattle lie, he announced he was going to volunteer at a soup kitchen. The words hung in the air between us, absurd in their randomness. In 3 years together, Daniel had never once mentioned volunteering anywhere. He wasn't uncharitable. He donated to causes online, but hands-on volunteering? That wasn't him. The man complained about having to go to the grocery store, and now he wanted to spend his evening serving food to strangers? Which soup kitchen? I asked, proud of how steady my voice sounded. He actually pulled up a website on his phone, showing me a place called Harbor Light Community Kitchen, located 45 minutes away in Gresham. They need extra hands for the dinner shift, he explained. I just thought it would be good to give back, you know? When he left that night, I followed him. I'm not proud of it, but I had to know. I stayed 3 cars behind, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles went white. He actually drove to Gresham, actually went to the soup kitchen. I parked across the street and waited, confused and starting to feel guilty. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe he really had just decided to become a better person. 2 hours later, he texted me photos. There he was, wearing an apron, ladling soup into bowls. Another showed him chatting with an elderly man, both of them smiling. The photos looked genuine, not staged. I drove home feeling like the worst girlfriend in the world. Here he was, doing something good for the community, and I was stalking him like some kind of crazy person. But when he came home that night and I was putting his clothes in the laundry basket, I found something that made my blood run cold. Tucked between his dirty socks was a piece of paper, folded into a small square. I unfolded it carefully, my hands trembling. It was a drawing, clearly done by a child, maybe 10 or 11 years old. Crayon and marker depicted 2 figures on what looked like a bed. One was clearly meant to be Daniel, tall with brown hair. The other was a small girl with blonde pigtails. They were holding hands, and there were hearts drawn all around them. At the bottom, in careful, childish handwriting, it was signed, "Love you forever, Lily." I sank onto our bedroom floor, the drawing clutched in my hand. Who was Lily? Why did she draw herself in a bed with my boyfriend? Why were there hearts? My mind reeled with possibilities, each more horrifying than the last. I wanted to be wrong, needed to be wrong, but every instinct screamed that something was terribly, horribly off. That's when my phone buzzed with a text from Dad. It was a screenshot from his property management app, showing a new booking for one of his Airbnb cabins. The name on the reservation was Daniel Morrison, my Daniel, and he'd booked a remote cabin in the Mount Hood National Forest for a long weekend, starting in 4 days. The same cabin where Dad and I had spent a week every summer when I was growing up, though Daniel didn't know about Dad's real estate portfolio, didn't know he owned that cabin. The next day, Daniel told me about another work trip. This time to Bend, for a software conference that I knew didn't exist because I'd already checked. He even showed me a fake registration email he'd somehow created. I smiled and nodded, told him how proud I was of his dedication to his career. Inside, I was planning. When the day came, I watched him pack his overnight bag, noticed how he included things that didn't make sense for a work conference. Board games, children's DVDs, boxes of juice, and packages of fruit snacks. My hands shook as I kissed him goodbye, told him to have a great trip. He smiled and said he'd miss me, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Guilt? Excitement? I couldn't tell. I waited 6 hours before making my move. Enough time for him to get to the cabin, to settle in, to let his guard down. The drive to Mount Hood usually took me an hour and a half, but I made it in just over an hour, my mind churning the entire way. Part of me hoped I'd find him there alone. Maybe meeting with clients I didn't know about. Maybe planning some elaborate surprise for me. Even as I thought it, I knew how ridiculous it sounded. The cabin sat at the end of a long gravel drive, surrounded by towering Douglas firs. I parked my car behind a cluster of trees about a quarter-mile away and approached on foot. The November air was crisp and cold, and I pulled my jacket tighter as I crept through the underbrush. My heart hammered against my ribs as I got closer. Close enough to see Daniel's Honda parked outside. Close enough to see lights glowing warmly through the windows. I made my way to the side of the cabin, to the large picture window that looked into the main living area. What I saw through that window changed everything, shattered my world into a million pieces that could never be put back together. Daniel was there, sitting on the couch I'd curled up on as a child, but he wasn't alone. There were 3 young girls with him, none of them older than 11 or 12. One had blonde pigtails. Lily. I recognized her from the drawing. What I saw next made me stumble backward, my hand flying to my mouth as I fought the urge to vomit. I did vomit, right there in the bushes, my body rejecting what my eyes were seeing. The bile burned my throat as I gasped for air, my fingernails digging crescents into my palms hard enough to draw blood. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. Not Daniel. Not the man I'd shared my bed with for 3 years. My hands trembled so badly I could barely hold my phone steady enough to take photos. But I forced myself to do it, to document what I was seeing, even as every fiber of my being wanted to run away, to pretend I'd never come here, never seen this. I managed to get several clear shots before I couldn't stand it anymore. Then I stumbled back through the woods to my car, my vision blurred with tears. I sent the photos to Dad with shaking fingers, unable to type actual words. He called immediately. "Stay where you are," he said, his voice deadly calm in a way I'd only heard once before, when Mom was dying and the doctors told us there was nothing more they could do. "I'm on my way. I'll be there in minutes." I knew he couldn't possibly make the drive that fast, but somehow, impossibly, I saw his black Mercedes pulling up beside my car less than 10 minutes later. He was out of the car before it fully stopped, pulling me into his arms. But there was no time for comfort. "We need to get those girls out of there now," he said, his face grim and determined. "I've already called the police. They're 20 minutes out, but we can't wait. If he realizes we're here, if he panics..." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Dad had grabbed a baseball bat from his trunk and he handed me pepper spray from his glove compartment. "You go around back," he instructed. "I'll take the front. If you can get any of the girls out quietly, do it. Don't confront him directly. Just get them to safety." I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. I crept around to the back of the cabin, staying low beneath the windows. The back door was unlocked, probably because Daniel felt safe in such a remote location. I slipped inside, finding myself in the small kitchen I remembered from childhood summers. I could hear Daniel's voice from the front room, suddenly frantic. "Get your things now," he was saying. "We're leaving. Move faster." One of the girls appeared in the kitchen doorway. She froze when she saw me, her brown eyes wide with fear. She looked so young, maybe 11, wearing a Justice t-shirt that was 2 sizes too big for her thin frame. Her hair was in messy braids like she'd been sleeping. "It's okay," I whispered, holding up my hands to show I meant no harm. "I'm here to help you. What's your name?" She glanced back toward the living room, then back at me. "Zoe," she whispered. "He said we were going camping. My mom doesn't know where I am." My heart broke for her, but there was no time. I held out my hand, and after a moment's hesitation, she took it. Her fingers were so small, so cold. "Please," she said, "help my friends too." That's when we heard the crash from the front room. Dad had made his move. I heard Daniel yell in surprise and anger, followed by the sound of a struggle. Bodies hitting furniture, grunts of effort, something glass breaking. "Get the girls out," Dad shouted, his voice strained with effort. I pulled Zoe with me toward the living room. 2 other girls were huddled on the couch, clutching each other. They looked even younger than Zoe, maybe 9 or 10. One had the blonde pigtails from the drawing. Lily. "Come with me quickly," I said, trying to keep my voice calm and reassuring. "We're going to get you somewhere safe. Your parents are looking for you." Behind us, Dad had Daniel pinned against the wall, the baseball bat on the floor, kicked out of reach. Daniel's face was red with rage and effort as he struggled. "You don't understand," he snarled. "They needed me. They wanted this. You're ruining everything." The words made me sick all over again, but I focused on the girls, herding them toward the back door. The oldest-looking one, who told me her name was Mia, helped the youngest, Emma, who couldn't stop crying. Lily walked like she was in a trance, her face blank with shock. I kept myself between them and the sounds of struggle, trying to shield them from any more trauma. We made it outside, just as the first police sirens became audible in the distance. Daniel must have heard them too because his struggles became more frantic. "You're dead, Sarah," he screamed. "You hear me? They'll find you. You don't know who you're messing with. This isn't over." I tried to cover the girls' ears to protect them from his threats, but they'd already heard too much, seen too much. We reached my car just as the first police cruiser came speeding up the drive, lights flashing red and blue against the dark trees. 2 officers jumped out, hands on their weapons. I quickly identified myself, explaining that my father was inside restraining the suspect, that there were cameras in the cabin that had recorded everything. They radioed for backup and rushed toward the cabin. I stayed with the girls, trying to comfort them as best I could. Zoe told me she'd met Daniel at the soup kitchen where he volunteered. He'd been so nice, bringing her extra food, talking to her about her problems at school. He'd offered to take her and some friends on a special camping trip, said he'd cleared it with their parents. Mia and Emma had similar stories, meeting him at after-school programs, at the library, places where vulnerable kids might be found alone. More police cars arrived, along with ambulances and a van from Child Protective Services. A detective named Elena Martinez took charge of the scene. She was in her 40s, with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a ponytail. She interviewed each girl separately with social workers present while I gave my statement to another officer. Through the cabin windows, I could see crime scene techs working, photographing everything. Dad emerged after what felt like hours, disheveled but unharmed. Daniel was brought out in handcuffs, and our eyes met one last time. The look he gave me was pure hatred, promising retribution. "This isn't over," he mouthed silently before they put him in the patrol car. Detective Martinez found me later, after the girls had been taken to the hospital for evaluation. "They're going to be okay," she said. "Physically, at least. You saved them, Sarah. If you hadn't acted when you did." She trailed off, but I understood. I thought of the friendship bracelet, the lip gloss, all the little clues I'd almost ignored. But Daniel was right about one thing. It wasn't over, not by a long shot. The next morning, Dad insisted I stay at his house, a sprawling Victorian in the West Hills with a state-of-the-art security system. I was sitting at his kitchen table, numbly stirring a cup of coffee I couldn't bring myself to drink, when Detective Martinez called. "Sarah, I need you to know something," she said. "We've been going through Daniel's devices. This wasn't his first time. We've found evidence going back years. Multiple victims. You're incredibly brave for what you did. Brave. I didn't feel brave. I felt naive, stupid, betrayed. How had I lived with a monster for 3 years and not known? How had I cooked him dinner, shared his bed, told him I loved him, all while he was doing unspeakable things to children? The guilt was overwhelming, even though everyone told me it wasn't my fault, that predators were experts at deception. The story hit the news that afternoon. Software engineer arrested and child predator sting. My name wasn't released, but it didn't matter. Daniel had friends, coworkers, people who knew we were together. My phone started buzzing with texts and calls. Some were supportive, friends reaching out in shock. Others were different. "How could you do this to him?" One message read, "He's a good man and you're trying to ruin his life." That evening, as I sat with Dad watching the news coverage, a reporter mentioned that Daniel was already out on bail. His family had money I'd never known about, connections I'd never suspected. The prosecutor was pushing to revoke bail, citing flight risk and danger to the community, but for now, he was free. The thought made my skin crawl. He knew where I lived, where I worked, my routines, my friends, everything about my life. The call started that night. My phone would ring at 2, 3 in the morning. When I answered, there was only breathing, then a click. I changed my number, but somehow the calls found me again. Then came the emails from addresses that were variations of my name, containing single sentences. "You'll regret this. We know where you are. He has friends everywhere." I went back to my apartment with Dad to pack some things and found my door slightly open. Nothing was stolen, but things had been moved. My photos were all face down. My dresser drawers were rearranged. On my bathroom mirror, written in what looked like my own lipstick, were the words, "We see you." The police dusted for fingerprints but found nothing useful. They increased patrols in my neighborhood, but what could they really do? I couldn't live in my own home, couldn't go to work without looking over my shoulder. My boss called a week later to tell me they were letting me go. There had been complaints, he said uncomfortably, concerns about the disruption to the workplace. I found out later that my coworkers had been receiving emails from fake accounts, supposedly from me, saying horrible things about them. Daniel's campaign to destroy my life was methodical and relentless. My social media accounts were hacked, filled with posts that made me look unstable. Someone was calling my friends, my extended family, telling them I'd had a mental breakdown, that I'd made everything up about Daniel out of jealousy. Some believed it. My cousin Michelle actually called to tell me I should get help, that ruining an innocent man's life wouldn't bring me happiness. Dad hired a private investigator and a cybersecurity expert. They traced some of the harassment back to Daniel's friends, but proving he was orchestrating it from behind the scenes was nearly impossible. He was smart, careful, using burner phones and encrypted apps. Meanwhile, the legal case moved at a glacial pace. Hearings were postponed. Evidence was challenged. Daniel's lawyer, a slick man named Raymond Brooks, filed motion after motion. 3 weeks before the trial was finally set to begin, things escalated. Dad's car tires were slashed in his own driveway. Dead roses were delivered to his office with a note. For the funeral, someone created a website with my name as the URL, filled with doctored photos and lies about my supposed history of mental illness and false accusations. I was cracking under the pressure. One night, I broke down completely in Dad's kitchen, sobbing until I couldn't breathe. "Maybe we should just drop it," I said. "Move away, start over somewhere else, let him win." Dad sat beside me, his arm around my shoulders. "That's exactly what he wants, sweetheart. If we run now, Daniel wins. And those girls, Lily, Zoe, Mia, Emma, they don't get justice. Think of all the other girls he might hurt if we don't stop him now." 2 weeks later, a package arrived at Dad's house. Inside was a USB drive. Against Dad's protests, I plugged it into an old laptop we didn't use for anything important. It contained dozens of photos of me taken over the past month. Me at the grocery store, getting coffee with my friend Anna, leaving my therapist's office. Some were taken through windows, showing me in Dad's house, places where I thought I was safe. The message was clear. They could get to me anywhere, anytime. That night, around 3 a.m, I heard a noise downstairs. A soft click, like a door opening, then footsteps on the stairs, slow and deliberate. I grabbed my phone and the pepper spray Dad insisted I keep by my bed, then locked myself in the bathroom, whispering to the 911 dispatcher. I could hear the footsteps getting closer, pausing outside my bedroom door. Then Dad's voice, shouting, a crash, the sound of breaking glass. I wanted to help him, but fear kept me frozen in place, crouched in the bathtub with the pepper spray clutched in my shaking hands. More sounds of struggle, something heavy falling, then sirens in the distance. The police found Dad in the hallway, bleeding from a cut on his forehead but conscious. The intruder had fled when he heard the sirens, leaving behind a knife in the front yard. "I saw his face," Dad told the police. "Young guy, early 20s, shaved head, never seen him before." It wasn't Daniel, but it was clearly someone he'd sent. The message was getting clearer. Testify, and this will be your life forever. Looking over your shoulder, waiting for the next attack, never knowing when or where it would come. Detective Martinez suggested we go into protective custody until the trial. We spent the next weeks in a series of hotels, moving every few days, always looking over our shoulders. I used the time to prepare my testimony with the prosecutor, a fierce woman named Josephine Reed who reminded me of my mother and her determination to see justice done. The night before the trial, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Daniel's face when they arrested him, that promise of revenge in his eyes. What if his intimidation had worked on the other witnesses? What if the girls were too scared to testify? What if the jury believed his lies? The courthouse was swarming with security when we arrived, metal detectors, armed guards, police dogs. It should have made me feel safer, but it only emphasized how dangerous Daniel and his supporters were. As we walked through the lobby, I spotted familiar faces in the crowd. Some were there to support me, but others watched with cold eyes. I recognized the woman who'd served us at our favorite restaurant, one of Daniel's coworkers, people who'd chosen to believe his version of events. Inside the courtroom, I finally saw Daniel again. He was wearing an expensive suit, his hair neatly styled, looking every bit the successful young professional. Nothing like the monster I'd seen through that cabin window. He actually smiled at me, a small, confident smirk that made my stomach turn. His family sat behind him, his mother glaring at me with undisguised hatred. The trial began with opening statements. Raymond Brooks painted Daniel as a misunderstood philanthropist who dedicated his free time to helping underprivileged youth. He suggested that I'd misinterpreted innocent interactions, that my jealousy and mental instability had led me to see something sinister where none existed. He even implied that Dad and I had orchestrated the whole thing for some nebulous financial gain. When it was my turn to testify, I felt strangely calm. I told the truth, simply and clearly, about the friendship bracelet and lip gloss, about the lies and the late nights, about following him to the cabin and what I'd seen there. I kept my voice steady, even when Brooks tried to rattle me during cross-examination. "Isn't it true, Ms. Collins, that you've been experiencing delusions?" he asked with a patronizing smile. "That you've made accusations against multiple people in your workplace?" "No," I replied firmly. "Those rumors were spread by Daniel's supporters to discredit me." "Do you have any proof of that?" he pressed. I wanted to scream, to point out the obvious campaign of harassment, but I knew that would only play into his narrative of me as unstable. So I stayed calm, answered his questions honestly, and trusted the jury to see through his tactics. The girls testified via closed-circuit video, their faces blurred to protect their identities. Their stories were heartbreakingly similar. Daniel had found them in places where vulnerable children gathered, had gained their trust with gifts and attention, had isolated them from their support systems. He told them they were special, that he was the only one who truly understood them. Classic grooming tactics that made me sick to recognize in retrospect. Then came a surprise witness. A young woman named Jackie took the stand, looking nervous but determined. She was 22 now, poised and articulate, but she'd been 8 when Daniel first approached her at an after-school program where he volunteered. Her testimony was devastating, showing a pattern of behavior spanning more than a decade. "I never told anyone until I saw his arrest on the news," Jackie said, her voice breaking slightly. "I was too ashamed, too scared. But I couldn't stay silent knowing there were other girls. Knowing he was still out there. The evidence was overwhelming. The security footage from the cabin, the drawings and gifts he'd kept as trophies, the messages on his devices, carefully coded but damning when decoded. Expert witnesses testified about grooming techniques, about how predators operated, about the long-term damage to their victims. Through it all, Daniel maintained his innocent act. But I saw the moments when his mask slipped, the flashes of rage when testimony didn't go his way, the calculating look when he whispered to his lawyer. The jury saw it too. They deliberated for only 5 hours before returning a verdict. Guilty on all counts. As the judge read the verdict, I watched Daniel's face transform. The confident smirk was gone, replaced by something ugly and desperate. He turned to look at me, and the hatred in his eyes was like a physical blow. But I didn't look away. I'd earned the right to see him face justice. At the sentencing hearing a month later, the courtroom was packed. All of Daniel's victims were there, along with their families. Some I hadn't even known about, girls and young women who'd come forward after the trial. The judge listened to impact statements for hours, faces and voices blending into a chorus of pain and survival. When the judge finally spoke, his words were measured but harsh. "Mr. Morrison," he said, "you have shown a pattern of predatory behavior spanning many years. You've shown no remorse, no acknowledgement of the harm you've caused. You pose a clear and present danger to the community, especially to children." The sentence was 30 years without the possibility of parole, followed by lifetime registration as a sex offender and strict monitoring if he was ever released. It wasn't enough, would never be enough for what he'd done, but it meant he'd be an old man before he could hurt another child. As they led Daniel away in shackles, he looked back at me one last time. Instead of threats or curses, he just looked defeated, broken. His network of supporters had abandoned him one by one as the evidence mounted. His family sat in stunned silence. The man who'd controlled my life through fear was just another criminal heading to prison. Outside the courthouse, I hugged Lily's parents, Zoe's grandmother, all the families who'd thanked me through tears for saving their children. I hugged Dad, who'd stood by me through months of hell. And for the first time since finding that friendship bracelet, I felt like I could breathe again. But the story wasn't quite over. 2 weeks after Daniel's sentencing, I was at a grocery store, finally feeling safe enough to shop alone, when a woman approached me in the produce section. She looked normal enough, mid-30s, yoga pants, and a Portland State hoodie. "You're Sarah Collins, right?" she asked, her voice friendly. When I nodded, her entire demeanor changed. "You ruined an innocent man's life with your lies," she hissed. "Theodore helped those girls. They needed guidance, and you twisted it into something sick." Before I could respond, she leaned closer. "We're watching you." Theodore has friends everywhere. Then she walked away, leaving me standing there with my heart racing. I called Detective Martinez immediately, but we both knew there wasn't much to be done unless she made a specific threat. Daniel might be in prison, but there were still people who believed his lies, who saw me as the villain who destroyed a good man. It was a sobering reminder that some battles don't end with a verdict. I changed my routines again, varied my schedule, stayed vigilant, but I refused to go back into hiding. I'd spent too much time letting Daniel and his supporters control my life through fear. Dad suggested I move in with him permanently, but I found my own place instead, a small cottage in Selwood with good locks and nosy neighbors who looked out for each other. The nightmares were bad at first. I'd wake up gasping, convinced Daniel was in the room or that I was back at the cabin, too late to save the girls. My therapist, Dr. Patel, was patient and understanding. She specialized in trauma, had worked with victims of abuse before. Slowly, session by session, I began to process what had happened. 3 months after the trial, I got a letter from the prison. My hands shook as I opened it, recognizing Daniel's handwriting. It was brief, just 3 sentences that made my blood run cold. I forgive you for what you did to me. I'm getting help now. When I get out, I'll find you so we can talk properly. Even from prison, he was trying to manipulate me, to make me the villain in his twisted narrative. And that last line was definitely a threat. Martinez added it to his file and had his communication privileges restricted, but the damage was done. I spent weeks looking over my shoulder again, jumping at shadows. 6 months after sentencing, I got a call from Martinez with unexpected news. Daniel had been attacked in prison, multiple stab wounds. He was in critical condition. Apparently, word had gotten around about his crimes. Child predators, she explained, didn't do well in the general population. He'd been moved to solitary confinement for his protection, but someone had gotten to him anyway. I didn't know how to feel. I didn't want him dead exactly. I wanted him to serve his sentence, to live with what he'd done. But I couldn't pretend to feel sympathy for his suffering either. He survived the attack, barely, and spent the rest of his sentence in protective custody, isolated from other inmates. In a way, it was a worse punishment than death. Life slowly returned to something resembling normal. I found a new job at a nonprofit that worked with at-risk youth, using my experience to help others. I dated occasionally, though trust came hard. I was always upfront about my past, and while some men couldn't handle it, others admired my strength. Michael was one of the latter, a pediatric nurse who understood trauma and healing. A year after the trial, I was having coffee with Dad when he showed me a news article on his phone. Local woman arrested in child trafficking ring. The woman in the mugshot looked familiar, and then I realized why. It was the woman from the grocery store, the one who'd threatened me. Her name was Bethany Morrison. Morrison, Daniel's sister. According to the article, she'd been helping her brother for years, identifying vulnerable children, gaining the trust of their families. The FBI had been investigating her since Daniel's arrest, building a case that eventually led to 6 more arrests. It was a whole network of predators with Daniel as just one piece. I testified at Bethany's trial too, describing our encounter at the grocery store, the threats she'd made. This time, I felt stronger, more confident. I knew what to expect, knew how to handle the defense attorney's tactics. And this time, I wasn't alone. Jackie testified again, as did several other survivors who'd found their voices. The investigation uncovered years of abuse, dozens of victims across multiple states. Daniel hadn't been working alone, had never been working alone. But because I'd spotted that friendship bracelet, because I'd trusted my instincts and refused to back down despite the threats and harassment, the entire network was being dismantled. Bethany was convicted and sentenced to 25 years. The other members of the network received similar sentences. Daniel, already serving 30 years, was charged with additional crimes that ensured he'd never walk free again. The news brought a mixture of relief and exhaustion. How many children had suffered while these monsters operated in the shadows? A few months after Bethany's sentencing, I received another letter, this time from a prison guard. Theodore Morrison died last night. Heart attack. Thought you should know. I sat with the news for a long time, waiting to feel something. Joy, relief, sadness. In the end, I felt only a quiet sense of closure. He was gone. He could never hurt another child, never send another threatening message, never appear at my door when his sentence ended. That night, I had the dream again, but it was different. I was at the cabin, but instead of being too late, I was leading the girls out into the sunlight. They were laughing, running toward their families, free and safe. I woke up feeling lighter somehow, as if a weight I'd carried for so long had finally lifted. I still volunteer at the nonprofit, sharing my story when it might help, working with families to recognize the warning signs I'd almost missed. Dad and I are closer than ever, bonded by the trial we survived together. Michael and I are talking about marriage, about building a future free from the shadows of the past. Sometimes I think about the woman I was before that friendship bracelet, naive and trusting, believing that love could conquer all. I mourn her innocence sometimes, but I don't want to be her again. The woman I am now has scars, yes, but also strength. I know that monsters can hide behind charming smiles, but I also know they can be stopped. When I share my story, people often ask how I found the courage to act, to investigate despite my fear, to testify despite the threats. The truth is, I didn't feel courageous at the time. I felt terrified, heartbroken, alone. But I thought of Lily, drawing pictures of a man who was supposed to protect her. I thought of Zoe, trusting someone who offered her kindness at a soup kitchen. I thought of all the girls who might come after them if I stayed silent. Courage, I learned, isn't the absence of fear. It's acting despite the fear, doing what's right even when every instinct screams at you to run away. It's trusting your gut when everyone tells you you're being paranoid. It's standing up in court and speaking your truth, even when powerful people are trying to silence you. The other day, I received a letter that made everything worthwhile. It was from Lily, now a teenager, thriving in her new life. She thanked me again for saving her, told me about her plans for college, her dreams of becoming a social worker to help other children. She signed it with a heart, just like in that first drawing, but this time it represented healing, not harm. I keep that letter in my desk drawer, pulling it out on days when the memories feel too heavy. It reminds me that light can emerge from the darkest places, that broken things can heal, that sometimes the most important battles are the ones that seem impossible to win. Daniel tried to destroy me for exposing him, but instead he showed me a strength I never knew I had. My name is Sarah Collins, and this is my story. Not a story of victimhood, though I was certainly a victim. Not just a story of survival, though I did survive. This is a story of transformation, of finding power in the worst moment of your life, of choosing to act when staying silent would be so much easier. It's a story of friendship bracelets and lip gloss, of warning signs and instincts, of fathers who believe their daughters and detectives who don't give up. Most of all, it's a story of hope, because if I could face down a predator and his network, if those brave girls could find their voices and speak their truth, if justice could prevail despite threats and intimidation, then there's hope for all of us. Hope that the darkness doesn't have to win, that courage can be found in the most unlikely places, that even the most carefully hidden monsters can be brought into the light. The sun is setting now as I finish writing this, painting the Portland sky in shades of pink and gold. Somewhere in this city, children are playing safely, protected by parents who know the warning signs to watch for. Somewhere, survivors are healing, finding their voices, reclaiming their lives. And somewhere, predators are thinking twice, knowing that their victims might just be stronger than they think. Daniel thought he could silence me with fear. Instead, he taught me that my voice was more powerful than I ever imagined. And now, I use that voice to make sure no child suffers in silence, no predator operates in shadow, no survivor stands alone. Because that's what you do when you've seen the darkness. You become a light for others trying to find their way through. This journey started with a friendship bracelet and ended with freedom. Not just for those girls, but for me too. Freedom from fear, from silence, from the power that secrets hold over our lives. It's a freedom I'll never take for granted, and one I'll spend the rest of my life helping others find. Because in the end, that's how we win. Not just by putting predators in prison, but by refusing to let them steal our light, our hope, our ability to trust and love and live fully. Daniel is gone, his network dismantled, but the work continues. Every time someone speaks up, every time a child is believed, every time a predator is stopped, we win a little more. And we will keep winning, one voice at a time, one child saved, one survivor healed, until the monsters have nowhere left to hide.